Welcome to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your host, Jeongmin Kim, the editorial director of Korea Pro.
And I'm John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro.
Join us for a weekly 15-minute conversation as we dive into the most pressing stories shaping South Korea and dissect the most complicated ones for you.
From politics to culture, technology to society, we've got you covered. So stay ahead of the curve and never be sidelined again.
So get ready for a fresh perspective on South Korea's news. This is the Korea Pro podcast.
All right, welcome back to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your co-host John, joined by Jeongmin Kim. Now, we've got something rather important to discuss today, so we're just going to dive right in. Now, we have to, of course, start with context. Now, last week, we had a Korean-American scholar, Sumi Terry, indicted by the U.S. courts for allegedly, at this point...
It's not a verdict yet.
It's not a verdict yet, for allegedly working with South Korean NIS officials, that's the National Intelligence Service, receiving bribes in the form of cash and other sorts of luxury goods items. And it seems that the crux of the matter was that she had not registered under the U.S. FARA law, which
right,
stands
and
for...
it was like an influence operation from the South Korean side, according to the indictment.
Right, and FARA standing for the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And so because of all of this kerfuffle that's been going on regarding Sumi Terry in D.C., there has been a lot of political infighting within South Korea as well.
Right. Just the gist is that the lawmakers of the both two major parties were accusing each other of their own administrations for failing.
It started off with the presidential office saying that they are going to investigate and reprimand former Moon Jae-in administration officials for meeting with her. And the Democratic Party responded.
And, like replacing experts at NIS with amateurs, quote unquote.
And the Democratic Party responded. They were saying that, Sumi Terry met with South Korean officials 52 times, but among those 52 times, the majority of those meetings took place with the Yoon administration. And so because of all this back and forth that's been going on, finally there's been some movements to reform South Korean law.
Right, and this is technically not new because during the previous 21st National Assembly, this has been constantly mentioned from both DP and PPP, Democratic Party and People Power Party, saying that our 1953 Criminal Act about espionage cases, punishments, it's too outdated.
Now, it's part of the Criminal Act.
Right.
And
so partial amendment.
Article 98 is what they deal with spies. And this law had not been amended since it was first promulgated.
So it's like half Hanja, the Chinese characters, of course. But just to walk you through what's being proposed right now. By the way, this is proposed by Park Sun-won, lawmaker of the Democratic Party, and by the way, who used to be the deputy chief of NIS under the Moon administration. And guess who co-signed it? Park Ji-won, the NIS chief at the time, who is a lawmaker right now. And the gist of the proposal of the partial amendment of the Criminal Act is first to redefine the target. It used to be just 적국, which is enemy country, or 준적국, quasi-enemy country. But if you look at the wording, it sort of only refers to North Korea because it's someone who you're at war with.
The law in its current form says enemy country, which in practice really only refers to North Korea.
Right. So the point of the proposal is to say, they actually directly stated, influence operation is a big competition between countries, even between 우방국, friendly countries or allies. So, in order to reflect the changes in the modern diplomacy, they're saying that the width of what's targeted has to include foreign countries as well, or organizations of foreign countries.
So in a nutshell, what Park Sun-won wants is to introduce the K-FARA law.
Yeah.
And there's got to be quite a bit of pushback to this because when Park Sun-won proposed this law, now we saw the document and we saw him giving the press briefing. And in the press briefing, he was actually very explicitly stating Sumi Terry's example. He was saying, what if, because of this law that we have right now, what if someone who is trying to what if someone who's working for the U.S. government tries to influence South Korean politics? And he explicitly mentioned the U.S. He didn't say China or Russia or Japan. He mentioned explicitly the United States. And so this has already gotten some people's ears perked up. Some people are saying, okay, is this law going to be interpreted in a way that discriminately only targets American influences, or is it going to target all countries equally? So this is going to be quite a risk factor that people
Right,
are
and
to
also
look
at
out
first,
for.
because of how Park Sun-won sort of framed it, like it sort of read like a tit for tat at first, but then if you look at the actual law, it will apply to wide-ranging new targets, really, right?
And yeah, so
But rather than those foreign entities, like people who talk to those foreign entities, really.
well, that's the problem. With the current proposed law, the phrase that is used is to exert influence. And if we are only looking at exert influence, anything can be viewed as exerting influence. I remember just a year ago, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was very dead set against South Korea's promulgation of the network usage fee law, which would have been really a law that could have heavily impacted U.S. websites like Netflix and YouTube. And so the U.S. Chamber of Commerce made several official statements opposing this law, saying that if this law is passed, it could negatively impact U.S.-South Korea relations. Now, is that going to be an example of trying to exert influence in South Korea?
Right, and going back to the Terry case as well, the whole influence operation, the definition of it, like what constitutes an influence operation, that has been also a controversy in general, right? Because the indictment includes stuff like promoting certain policy for South Korean government, or, you know, for instance, trilateral relations, bilateral relations, whatnot. But devil's advocate, if we are not talking about just the U.S., it is like a known secret that Chinese academics, which is under the Chinese party, it's like a known secret that the influence operations against South Korean academics is a thing, and it's been going on for decades.
And it really peaked when South Korea had installed THAAD anti-missile batteries in South Korea.
Like they would invite academics for really nice banquet, really nice dinner, treat them nicely. It's not like they are discussing something like discreetly, like sharing information, classified information or anything, but they treat them nice, and they persuade the academics to say something nice about Chinese policy in the Indo-Pacific or something.
Right, and that is all very soft forms of trying to influence other countries' lawmakers and other countries' scholars and think tanks.
Right.
And that's been going on not just, of course, only in South Korea, but globally for as long as statecraft has existed.
That's true.
But the way that this law is being proposed in its current form would criminalize all of that.
Yeah.
And that would have a really chilling effect, not only on, obviously, spies,
Right.
but on academic exchanges, think tanks, even just government officials meeting other people. It could have a really important chilling effect, which I'm not quite sure if Park Sun-won actually thought this through.
I think maybe they did think this through a little bit, looking at the technicalities of the clauses, because the punishment level is different. If it's it's working actively for the enemy country, it's as up to 사형, execution, because this is an old law. But if it's just influence operation related stuff or related to foreign countries in general, it's as low as 3 years. So I think they try to sort of differentiate between different levels, but also because it's so vaguely termed, it's quite difficult in reality, probably.
And you mentioned this earlier. This is not the first time South Korea is pushing for this law. South Korea did talk about this law last year. Now,
why did it get rejected, though?
Now, for those of you who might not remember this, there was a time early last year, when there were rumors of these clandestine Chinese police stations, supposedly that were operating in South Korea to track down Chinese dissidents.
So this was more about China at the time.
It was about China at the time, but the law at the time was still the same law that we're talking about today. The law only specified enemy countries, which China is not. And so even if these secret police stations were in South Korea, the law did not allow the authorities to actually go after these individuals.
Right.
Now, because of that, there was all this proposal to amend the law as well.
By both parties,
by
right?
both the Democratic Party and the People Power Party. But the pushback came from the judiciary. What the judiciary was saying at the time was that if we make this into a blanket law, and we're going to have then we're going to come into this very awkward position where the law would have to treat, say, American and Chinese influence operators or espionage or spies in the same way.
Is it in any way possible to I'm asking this, but I know it's already quite tricky. But there's a term 준적국, quasi-enemy state. But making China sound like 준적국 will open up a can of worms, right?
Is China even a quasi-enemy
It's
state?
not, because it's one of the biggest trading partners for South Korea, and South Korea is trying very hard to not be in a hostile relations with China.
Well, I'm not a diplomat, so I don't really have to cover myself from saying this, but there is a strong argument to make to say that China is a quasi-enemy state. If we look at all of the espionage cases, the majority of them involve Chinese spies.
Yeah, and cybersecurity
issues as well. And so there has there's already been this state of, shall we say, tension and unfriendliness between South Korea and China, even though officially we are all smiles and we're all trade partners. But would we actually dare to officially declare China as such a state?
For instance, in a ruling.
Exactly.
That will open up diplomatic spats. And what about Russia?
Well, Russia is also another case entirely. Now, Russia might be a less of an issue right now because we already have sanctions placed on the Russian government, Russian businesses and entities.
And also, we are sort of looking at North Korea and Russia sort of in a packet now since the NATO summit.
Since Vladimir Putin visited Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. So Russia would be less of a bomb that we would be having to deal with. But China is the big elephant in the room.
Right.
And so because of the judiciary's concerns about how this law would have forced South Korean law, how would have forced the South Korean law to treat American and Chinese officials, one an ally and one a very important trading country, and to treat them in the same way with the law. That would have also made things very diplomatically untenable.
I think that would be part of the reason why PPP might not be completely on board with this version, right?
There is a very good chance that the People Power Party will say that this law is politicized. And it's not just for the general principles that we just discussed. It's also to do with the political infighting that we also mentioned earlier. That's most likely going to be their most immediate concerns.
I can already imagine DP using this to accuse a lot of UN administration officials like Park Jin for being pro-Japanese influence operation sort of agents, and the PPP accusing DP for same thing with China.
Exactly. When Yoon met with Joe Biden and Fumio Kishida in Camp David, the DP made a statement saying that Yoon made South Korea subservient to these both countries. And in the official statement, they said, what did South Korea gain out of this meeting? And so, yes, there's a very good chance that the Democratic Party will say, hey, you are making South Korea subservient to the U.S. and Japan.
Influenced by
Tokyo and Washington and God knows who else is coming from there. Whose president are you? And that's going to be their line of thinking. And the People Power Party is going to say the same thing. Remember when...
xie thing.
It's not about just xie. Sure, that's going to be for Lee Jae-myung, but we also have to talk about President Moon. When President Moon went to China a few years ago when he was still president, he described China as this big mountain peak, whereas South Korea is a small country. And so that was where Yoon got this talking point of being able to accuse the Democratic Party saying, you are making South Korea subservient to China.
Right, and also I'm just going to point out Park Sun-won is also risking himself a little bit here because he used to be at the Shanghai consulate during that time when the THAAD controversy was going on.
Now, to be fair, he did only serve for 6 months, which was unusual. They usually last 2 to 3 years.
That usually means that you worked on particular agenda.
A particular agenda, sure. And at the time, especially it was since around the time when President Moon was trying to have this détente with North Korea, I'm pretty sure that there was a brief period of time in Park Sun-won's life when he was in China when the phrase "end of war declaration" did not just leave him ever.
Well, end of war declaration was 2021, right? And by the way, in 2021 November, he was at the NIS.
Exactly. And so this is a lot of people trying to basically cover their own asses.
Stay ahead in understanding South Korean politics, business and society with a Korea Pro subscription. Gain access to daily email newsletters, expert briefings and exclusive events designed for professionals like you. As a podcast listener, you can now try Korea Pro for free and subscribe at a discounted rate if you like what we're doing. Equip yourself with the insights that matter most. Visit koreapro.org/podcast to subscribe and ensure you never miss a critical update. Korea Pro, never be sidelined again.
So moving on from like state to state, like government to government sort of relations, this like foreign entity part, it also includes companies. So what will be the impact on the ground?
Well, that's the exact thing. When we come talk about foreign entities, and if we're going to talk about influence operations, we cannot ignore defense companies.
Yeah.
Defense and politics can never be separated.
In any country.
In any country. If South Korea wants to buy, say, F-15s or F-35s going forward, then which companies are going to start coming into South Korea to try to influence the South Korean government to buy a certain jet from a certain company?
Right, and there are a lot of intermediaries who used to be high levels or working levels at defense ministry, foreign ministry, industries ministry, who end up moving on with their career, joining like foreign companies as well, right? How are we going to define that going forward?
Well, that's the big question mark, and I think that's why we need to keep a very close eye on how this law goes forward in its amendments.
And we will keep you posted.
And if there's any kind of topic that you would like for us to cover on this podcast, please send us your suggestions at podcast@koreapro.org. And also, please leave a review on wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Week that was and week ahead. What happened in South Korean domestic politics this week?
Well, the biggest domestic news of the week was that the People Power Party finally elected their official leader. It's the first time that the PPP has had an official leader in 7 months. Han Dong-un has now been elected in the party primaries.
Wow, I'm so surprised.
Yeah, it was a big shock to everyone who's not paid attention.
But jokes aside, Han was a front runner for a long time.
And if you'd like to know more about the implications of Han's selection as the party's official leader, please subscribe for more.
And week ahead, not really week ahead, but today, on Friday, there is a second round of something nicknamed impeachment hearing against Yoon, but it's really not impeachment hearing. But
it's just theatrics, really.
Right, but they will discuss some allegations related to the First Lady today on Friday.
Not for the first time.
Not for the first time, and they will probably continue doing that in coming weeks as well.
Right, so again, please subscribe if you want to know more, and all of this week ahead information will be sent to your email inboxes.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why they matter every morning in your inboxes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for your weekly dose of insight. And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
And I'm John Lei. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.